seated. At one point or another in all of our lives, all of us have at some point known some young man that we thought was, to say the least, irresponsible. Someone who in the days of his misspent youth we even considered somewhat reckless. And then something happens. And this young man shocks us by becoming dependable and successful. He ends up actually being our doctor, or our lawyer, or perhaps our accountant. Thinking about that, it brought to mind a picture that someone took at my Uncle Bill's memorial service. It was in 2020. We were in Austin, and my cousins Mike and Stan were sitting with me. The three of us were sitting at a table after the memorial service. We were sitting there talking. And Matt saw the picture. And Matt said, "Oh my goodness. You've got a preacher, a doctor, and a lawyer. I see the beginning of a really good joke there." You know, I think about this, and I thought about the young man that I taught in Bible class when he was in junior high school. And if you'd walked in that junior high that class of boys that were all in junior high that I was teaching, and you'd pointed at him and said, "One of these days, this man is going to be your CPA," I would have laughed uncontrollably. And yet, that young man that I taught in that junior high Bible class ended up doing my taxes for more than 40 years. He just recently retired in December of this past year. There was another young man in that class that ended up opening a very successful automobile repair shop. He would always do front-end alignments and brake jobs for me. And if you had pointed to those two guys and said, "One of these days this guy's going to be fixing the brakes on your car and this guy's going to be doing your taxes," I would have said, "Yeah, right, I'm going to end up in jail for tax evasion, assuming I don't die in a car wreck because my brakes failed." We've all known things like that. We've known young men that grew up to be successful, and we said, "Well, you know, I knew him when," and you just finish the story. And that's where we'll describe him as being somewhat worthless at some point in his life. We'll remember that we thought about him when he was growing up and figuring, yeah, he's going to end up in prison probably. I mean, he drove his car too fast through the neighborhood. All the teachers always had problems with him in school. He was rebellious and defiant in every possible way. And we actually express amazement that he became successful. Because we look at him now and remember him then, and the difference is like night and day. And then again, it really isn't that big a change. It's a change, yes. And on the surface, it looks like he's an entirely different man. But what really it means is that the goals have changed. In the days of his misspent youth, he was an undependable boy. And his objective was to have a good time. And he didn't let or want to let anything get in the way of that. But as time went on, he met a girl. He got married. He settled down. They had children. And all of that changed the main focus and the plans of his life. It changed his goals. His objective now is to be a respectable member of the community. His objective now is to be a good husband and a good father. And he pursues that goal with the same intensity he sought those other goals in the reckless days of his youth. What's changed? Something inside of him has changed. His present desire and objective has crowded out that desire to have a good time. He no longer has that desire to sow his wild oats and pray for a crop failure. That responsible young boy no longer exists. Love changed his life. He now has a new first devotion. He now has a new desire of heart. I remember as a young boy watching an old black and white movie about the life of Thomas Alva Edison. And the movie prompted me to read several different biographies of the life of the great inventor. And from reading those biographies, I learned that Edison, the great inventor, was a surprisingly poor student in school. Something I could well relate to. I also found that some of Edison's teachers actually thought him to be slow and perhaps even somewhat retarded. And yet the boy Edison, who did so poorly in school, became one of the world's great inventors, who would sometimes spend as much as 18 hours a day in his laboratory. His experiences resulted in numerous brilliant new inventions. Why? He had a new purpose, and he had a new devotion. And that crowded out the irresponsibility of Edison's school days. Can we be honest with ourselves, and can we be honest with each other this morning? If we'll all be honest, every person within the sound of my voice can remember times of waste in our own lives. I could tell you some stories of my high school days and the close, intimate relationship that I had with the high school principal at Marshall High School. We spent many afternoons together talking about things. He made me a promise one day. We were having one of our afternoon discussions. He said, "Mr. Perkins, I will promise you that you do not need to worry about the future. As far as graduation is concerned, I promise you, you will graduate with your class and you will leave Marshall High School." I thought it was nice of him to be so concerned about my future in that way. All of us can remember times in our lives, if we're honest, where we were aimlessly moving about and wasting some of our time and our energy. And it reminds me of a passage of Scripture from the pen of the Apostle Paul, where he wrote in the 1 Corinthians letter in chapter 13, he said, "When I was a child, I spake as a child. I understood as a child. I thought as a child. But when I became a man, I put away childish things." Greater, deeper devotion. The deepening and maturing of thought crowd out many things in our lives. And that principle is of a tremendous value in tackling the problems you and I face. Because, my friends, we face a world to be remade. In case you haven't noticed it, we live in a very wicked world. A world with a great many wicked people. There are people who daily, shamelessly give themselves to their passions. There are people in this world of ours who hate. And there are people that are borne down with greed. In fact, if we listed them, the list of sins that exist in our world today would be a lengthy list. And the way to get rid of these sins is simply to find a greater love. A new love will change people's lives. And it's one of the greatest powers that exists The secret to making men and women over is not in scolding them for being evil. While scolding folks for being evil might be valid, and while it might be defensible, it just isn't very effective. The better way to make people over is to plant within their hearts a new devotion. The better way to make people over is to plant within their hearts a new love. There are two ways of trying to remake our world, the people in our world. One of those is to take sin and describe sin with all of its viciousness and with all of its ugliness. And sin is ugly, and you can't read newspaper accounts of crime that exists in our world without seeing that sin is ugly. But somehow, even when you describe sin, even when you make it realistic, it's hard. It's hard for people that are engaging in sin to just give it up. The better way, the more lasting way, is to plant something higher and nobler in their hearts. To plant a higher, nobler love in their heart that's going to crowd out the love of sin and the love of evil. Because you see, you can't get rid of the old without putting in the new. The old, the inferior, the bad, it can best be overcome by something new, something superior, something that's good. Even if you take someone and you convince them of the folly of sin, often it's just for a short time that they leave their sin. Because after a while, they're going to be back at it. Just seeing the evil of sin, just seeing the evil of sin, that's really not enough to get people to leave it permanently. Jesus set forth this principle in Matthew chapter 12. It's the parable of the haunted house. In that story, an evil spirit is cast out of a man. And that evil spirit went through the waterless places seeking rest, and it was unable to find it. And it returned to the house that it had been banished from, and it found it swept and garnished and clean. And the evil spirit moved back in and went and found 7 more evil spirits, even more wicked than he was. And all of them came and occupied the empty house. We can convince men and women that sin is bad. We can do that. But folks, we have to replace it with something better in their lives. And the answer to overcoming sin is love. Write this down. It's on the final exam. Love can change your life. You remember the story of Solomon? He was a man who tasted everything that could be tasted. He partook of all of the things that life had to offer. And he said, all is vanity. He realized some of the things that he kept on tasting were wrong, but he kept on tasting them. And Solomon made the proclamation. He said, all is vanity. It was also Solomon who continued to engage in those sinful and lustful practices. It is not enough to know that sin is terrible. That's not enough. There's got to be something more. There's got to be something deeper. And that something more is an all-consuming devotion to something that is good. We overcome evil with good. I want you by an eye of faith this morning, I want you to look back to the man Moses. He has grown up in the palace of Pharaoh, the grandson of Pharaoh, the adopted son of Pharaoh's daughter. And he's having to make one of the greatest decisions of his life. On the one hand is Egypt with all of its glamour. There's Egypt with its wine, its women, its song. There's Egypt with its power and its prestige. And can you see Moses? As he turns his back upon everything Egypt has to offer, its riches, its splendor, its power, and he turns toward the mud huts of the Israelites. The writer of Hebrews describes it this way in Hebrews 11. By faith, Moses, when he was come to years, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God rather than enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season, for he had respect under the recompense of the reward. That's in Hebrews chapter 11, verses 24 through 27. See it. Get the picture of it. Remember the old balance scales that you would buy candy in the candy store, or you might buy produce, or you might buy things at the market? And you had the balance scales where they would put weights on one hand, and then they would put your product on the other, and when they balanced, then you had the right amount. I want you to see those balance scales in the man's hands, weighing the merits of going on as an Egyptian prince against the merits of giving it all up for God and for the righteousness of God, and the love that Moses had for God and for God's people. It crowded out the love that he had for Egypt with its glamour, its splendor, and its riches. Or maybe you might want to think of the man Simon who became known as Peter. There was a time that Simon loved fishing. He earned his living on that little jewel of a lake known as Galilee. But later on, a deeper love came into Simon's heart than his love for fishing. And there was that beautiful, wonderful, glorious moment when Peter and Andrew and James and John left their fishing business to follow Jesus. Peter's love for being a fisher of men crowded out his former love of fishing in the sea. Are you listening? That deeper love that remade the life of Moses. That deeper love that remade the life of Peter and Andrew and James and John. That same deeper love that remade their lives can remake my life and yours. We've got to fill our lives with good things. We need to fill our lives with things that are worthy. There need to be pictures of inspiring lives hanging on the walls of our hearts. Pictures that we have in our homes often do a lot to inspire us. I look at pictures of my grandfathers. I look at pictures of Grandfather Perkins. And I see the calloused hands. I see the scars on his arms. I see the man that never made it past the 4th grade. I see him running logging crews, running a sawmill. Because I go from that scene of that man with those calloused hands to a scene at Uncle Bill's funeral where his 3 grandsons are sitting. The preacher, the lawyer, the doctor. It was because of being able to stand on his shoulders that we're able to be where we are. Or I look at pictures of Grandfather Brian standing there with his suit on and his Bible in his hand. I think of him fearlessly proclaiming the Word of God. And when I look at those men, it inspires me to try to do better. Just in that same way, if we have in our hearts and minds pictures of worthy lives from God's Word, they can inspire us also. We need a wonderful picture of Abraham and his faith that made him known as the friend of God. We need a portrait of Job and his devotion to God when everything was taken away. Job said, "The Lord giveth, the Lord taketh away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." And it says in all this, Job sinned not, nor did he charge God foolish. We need to see Joseph when day after day Potiphar's wife tried to get Joseph to sleep with her, and Joseph said, "I can't betray my God and I can't betray my master." We need to see the purity of Joseph. We need to see Daniel and his courage as he was thrown into the den of lions. We need to see Ruth and her loyalty. We need to see John and his love. And we need to see Paul and his zeal for the Word of God. And those are just a few of the pictures from this book we can hang in our hearts. But they can offer us constant encouragement, and they can offer us powerful encouragement. And then along with these portraits of great men of the Bible and great women of the Bible to inspire us, the 23rd Psalm comes to mind. Oh, how many people has that comforted in times of trial? The Lord's my shepherd. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. Why? Because God is with me. In hours of temptation, in hours of weakness, in hours of trial, we can say those words over and over and over. And there comes to us then an inner strength and the power of that new love. What we have to do, we have to fill our lives with Jesus Christ. Greatest of everything is to fasten our minds on the image of Jesus. There's a beautiful passage in 2 Corinthians 3 and verse 18. Paul writes, "But we all, with open face, beholding as a glass the glory of the Lord, are changed into the same image from glory to glory." If you and if we can focus our minds on the glory of Christ, do it often enough and long enough, we'll be transformed from that same image from glory to glory. There's a companion passage of that in Romans chapter 12, verses 1 and 2. Paul says, "I beseech you, brethren, by the mercies of God, you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable unto God, which is your reasonable service." Now here it is. "And be not conformed to this world, but be you transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God." We can be transformed by drinking in that which is good and by renewing our minds. We can be transformed by reading the Scriptures, by meditating on great lives, and we can be changed. None of us is strong enough to discourage themselves from evil in our own strength. But as we take the power of God into our lives, as we take the power of God into our lives, it pushes out evil for us. The writers of the world's great literature knew this. Nathaniel Hawthorne wrote his short story of the Great Stone Face about a boy who grew up in a community in the mountains. And the legend was that someday the kind man whose face was on the mountain would appear in their town. As that young boy grew to be an old man, someone saw him and said, "You're the man whose face is on the mountain." Or if you go and read George Eliot's Silas Marner, you find the old miser in that story. His life was changed because a little girl whose mother had died in the snow, he took her in. And the miser's life was changed because that little child came into his life. You see, the writers of fiction have discovered the secret we've been talking about all this time. The expulsive power of a new love. And there's no greater passage to sum it all up than Galatians chapter 2 and verse 20. And there the Apostle Paul writes, "I am crucified with Christ. Nevertheless I live, yet not I, but Christ liveth in me." There's the great question. Is Jesus Christ living in you? Do you belong to Christ? Is he the Lord and Master of your life? If Jesus Christ is not Lord and Master of all of your life, he's not Lord and Master at all in your life. If you've never made Jesus the Lord of your life, I beg you to do it before you leave the building this morning. To just come in simple, trusting faith, believing in Jesus Christ with all your heart, turning your back on sin through repentance, confessing his name, and being buried in the waters of baptism for the remission of past sins. You know what that'll do? It'll make you a Christian. Nothing more, nothing less, and nothing else. It'll just make you a simple New Testament Christian. And Jesus can begin to be the Lord and Master of your life. And maybe you've done that. You haven't lived God's kind of life. You need to come back and say, "Lord, I've sinned. Lord, I need to come back home and have brothers and sisters pray with you for you." I don't know what's going on in your life. I don't know what other needs there might be. I don't know what we can help you with. But if there are needs in your life that we can help you with to make Jesus Lord and Master of your life,